You're watching RT International live from Moscow, just gone 9 p.m. here in the Russian capital. I'm Daniel Hawkins, breaking news for you this hour from Syria. The government in Damascus has confirmed the US-led coalition has struck its forces, allowing the Islamic State group to make advances. The Russian Ministry of Defense has also confirmed that the US-led coalition has carried out 4 airstrikes in the area of Deir ez-Zor, that's in the east of Syria, killing 62 soldiers and injuring around 100 others. 2 F-16 fighters, 2 A-10 jets allegedly entered from the side of Iraq. That's according to the ministry. The Pentagon, however, hasn't yet commented on those accusations. Well, let's bring in Kamal Alam from the Royal United Services Institute to give us some more on the incident. Thanks for joining us, Kamal, on RT. What do you think could have happened here, and how was this possible?
I think there are 2 possibilities. One is that it's a genuine mistake and the Americans, in going after ISIS, have gone after the Syrian military by mistake, because that Deir ez-Zor city is under Syrian Arab Army, but the rest of the districts are all under ISIS territory. So that could be one feasibility, that they bombed the Syrian military by mistake. I think the second option could be that after what happened yesterday and day before, where some of the so-called moderate Syrian opposition chased out US special forces, there's been a lot of problems in the States. People are like, are we losing the moderate support? Do we need to do something to make them happy? So if this is an action whereby they're attacking the Syrian military to make the so-called moderates happy, then that's a very dangerous turn of events. So let's hope it's not the second scenario and it's the first scenario where it could be a genuine mistake.
And, of course, this comes on the back of a truce in the country that's only been going for, well, less than a few days now. It took weeks and months to hammer out. What could that mean for the truce? Is there a chance for it to hold after this incident?
I think if there's not a quick and swift inquiry by the US military into what perpetrated the strike and whether it was deliberately targeted, then I think there could be problems. If this was a deliberate attack on the Syrian military, then that's a massive escalation, because there is absolutely no Syrian moderate group or the so-called moderates near Deir ez-Zor. Deir ez-Zor is completely surrounded by terrorists. The Syrian government and the Syrian Arab Army have been holding out for 4 years in the most hostile environment. And the city is under control of Damascus, whilst the countryside is under control of ISIS. So there's absolutely no reason for the Americans to give any air support to ISIS.
Just if this is confirmed as some sort of deliberate US coalition airstrike, of course, a very early days yet, we do need a full open investigation into what happened. But this will be the first time that the US coalition has directly launched airstrikes against the Syrian armed forces. What could that actually mean wider for the Syrian civil war?
I think definitely it's the first time that it's been targeted. It could be a massive change. As I said, all the signs coming out of Washington and America over the last 6 months have been that they want to cooperate with Russia and the Syrian government in going after terrorism. So an escalation like this is obviously something that was not expected, or the Syrians were prepared for it. But I feel that because the terrorist groups that have been masking themselves as legitimate opposition are losing the battle, this could be a move to appease them, because Golani, the leader of one of the Syrian terrorist groups, is in Qatar today. In fact, gave an interview to Al Jazeera. This could be some kind of move to appease the Syrian groups, to tell them that they're still on their side. In any case, this is a very, very dangerous move. And if this is a genuine mistake, then obviously things will not change. But if it's not a mistake, then I think that could be the end of the ceasefire. I'm sure the Russians will not take it lying down either.
We're just getting news that the Speaker of the Russians from the Russian Ministry of Defense, they say they consider this airstrike, this coalition airstrike, to be a sign of unwillingness for the US to coordinate its actions with that of the Russians. That's something that they've been calling on for a while, isn't it? Some sort of coordination here, a sharing of targets, of locations to enable some sort of joint operation task force here. I mean, could an event like this be a step perhaps to encourage the Americans to start sharing data, start coordinating? Or, as you say, is there more risk that the situation will escalate and turn negative as opposed to being a step towards, you know, both sides saying, look, we do have to start sharing coordinates, we have to start sharing intelligence to avoid these sorts of incidents?
I think there was momentum building up over the last few weeks of complete US and Russian cooperation. And there have been a lot of senior retired American generals who've come out and said that American military must coordinate with the Russian military, including General Mike Flynn, who is the former director of Defense Intelligence Agency, who also traveled to Moscow to meet President Putin a few months ago. So there is significant percentage of the US military that believe in this cooperation. But then, of course, there is also a significant percentage of the military that do not want to cooperate with Russia. So I think on the positive side, this could be a wake-up call that they must work with the Russians, because the reason the Russian military has been successful is they have the right intelligence from the ground. And you can only have right intelligence from the ground if you're working with the Syrian intelligence and the Syrian military, because they are the fighting force on the ground that know where the coordinates are, along with the Russian special forces. So I think this could be a wake-up call if it's a positive sign. If it's a negative sign, this could drift the Russians and the Americans further apart.
Indeed, and just while you're there, Kamal, wanted to ask you on the earlier incident of the footage allegedly of American forces being chased out of that Syrian town as well. Obviously, there have been disagreements in the past with all parties on who's moderate, who is not, who is being backed, who's being targeted, etc. The scandal surrounding the lack of moderate rebels has been very well pronounced, but you mentioned earlier that this action against the US military could perhaps be some sort of sign of discontent among the moderate rebels here. Could we perhaps see that growing across Syria on a wider scale, or do you think this was a one-off action in a specific area due to specific grievances?
I think no, this is definitely a sign that it could be growing. I mean, there have been earlier incidents where different moderate groups backed by the Americans have been fighting each other. This is obviously the first evidence that we've seen that they turned their animosity towards their trainers and their handlers, the US Special Forces. But the fact remains, if you look at the video, they're openly calling all Americans, all Christians, crusaders. They're calling for complete wipeouts of the so-called Crusader army. So I think this basically is a sign of things to come. This is exactly what happened in Afghanistan 30 years ago. The Mujahideen that the Americans backed turned into Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. So I think the Americans need to wake up very fast not to repeat Afghanistan. There is no way an Islamic guerrilla force can ever be reliable. They're mercenary, they're terrorists. You can buy them for 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 months, but eventually they will show their true colors of terrorism. And they're very, very anti-Christian. And there's no way they would ever be reliable allies for any country in the world.
Just back to this breaking news story, Kamal, of this airstrike in Deir ez-Zor. What do you believe needs to happen in order for similar incidents to be avoided in future? We know there's been marathon talks, obviously, between John Kerry, Lavrov, multi-party talks here as well. Stefan de Mistura, the UN representative on Syria, taking part. But on a ground level, which is where the war is being fought and the problems are taking place, what do you believe needs to happen to to make sure the right terrorist groups are targeted? ISIL, al-Nusra or Jabhat al-Fatah, they're excluded from the ceasefire. As we know, they're fair game for both Russian, US airstrikes, Syrian airstrikes. What needs to happen to make sure incidents like this don't happen again?
I think the most glaring and obvious fact that comes out of this incident is that they need to coordinate all the airstrikes with the Russians. They need to coordinate also with Damascus, but I think they will not coordinate with Damascus. But the first thing they need to do is coordinate with the Russian Air Force and the Russian military. Otherwise, there will be repeat incidents like this, because there is no reliable intelligence that the Americans have on the ground. They exclusively rely on satellite imagery and drone footage. And there's only so much technology can do. At some point, you need human intelligence. And at the moment, the Western coalition are lacking any credible human intelligence on the ground.
OK, Kamal Allen from the Royal United Services Institute. If we can keep you there with us just for the next few minutes, we're going to get back to that breaking news story, but we will come back to you shortly. If you can stay on the line, we'll get back to you just imminently on that story. Well, American special forces have reportedly fled from the Syrian town of Al-Rai, that's near the Turkish border, after being threatened by US-backed rebels.